The sign-in code for this presentation is 3209.
Hey everyone, welcome back for our forums that we've been running. We are going to be talking about with pretty much when it comes to navigating social situations, like when it comes to like with friendships to really anything when any social situation. Me and Haley are going to share like a little bit from like each of our own experiences and stuff. And if you have like any questions as like from the provider perspective, let us know. Haley, if you want to start it off first to share some of your experiences when it comes to navigating like with friendships and like interacting with people.
Okay. So one of my very first things that I can think of is like when I first became not became autistic, but when I was first diagnosed, I was transitioning from elementary to middle school. And in elementary school I had gotten bullied, and so like because of that I kind of went to a different school because that was where, instead of the one where everybody else was going. So as a result, I didn't really know like the people I was going to like middle school, because usually if you go to middle, like elementary to middle, you usually with the same people. But in that circumstance, I was starting at square one. And so like I remember I had gone to ABA, wasn't a thing yet. But it was almost there at that point. But I had gone to my psychologist and we actually sat there. And I remember because this is how I met my best friend that I still talk to today. So I went to the psychologist's office and we sat there because we were preparing for the first day of middle school. And I was role playing with like my parents and my psychologist, saying like, here's how you're going to introduce yourself to these people. Like you're going to walk into school. And like, cause like I hadn't really at that point as a little kid, at that point it was mostly just like, hey, I'm a little kid. We want to be friends. Cool. Like we're friends now. But like now it was because we were growing older, it was those more like complex social situations where like you actually have to like make a good first impression. And so that was something they wanted to work with me on. So we were practicing. And so I would be pretending I was going to the first day of class and be like, hey, can I sit here? And like if they responded one way, here's how I would respond. If they responded another way, here's how I could respond. So like I was practicing like those different situations. And so I remember vividly that I used that practice on that first day of middle school. And I can remember the people who were sitting at that table. I can remember my best friend now was the one who actually responded to me. I was like, hey, can I sit here? And she was like, yeah, you can sit here. That's so-and-so, that's so-and-so. And we weren't like best friends in the beginning, but actually that was how we first met. So we still talk to each other every day. So I feel like that was like when I think about like navigating social situations, that's like my main like story that I have, because it's so prevalent and like it's still affecting me to this day, because I was taught, hey, here's how you're doing this. And it wasn't like you're doing it wrong. It was, hey, you might need a little bit of help. So we're going to like, it was basically BST. Like we're going to practice this and we're going to model this and then you're going to do it. And now I'm here. So I think that was, I think it's pretty cool to like tell that story. But yeah, like before that, like I said, as a kid, like usually like, hey, do you want to be my friend? But that moving on, like as an adult, taking that like situation that I've had before I go into new social situations, I do think about like, okay, how would somebody respond if I said this? How would somebody respond if I said this? So it's kind of thinking ahead of time instead of like putting myself in that situation, like just jumping in head first, no preparation whatsoever. So I think as somebody who doesn't really catch the social cues, to think about them ahead of time, and that helped a lot.
Yeah, I pretty much was the same way, like when it comes to navigating like with friendships and stuff, that like when it comes to like, let's say like if I'm going to like initiate a conversation to someone for the first time, I literally had to practice using like pretty much with BST that of how to engage in a conversation with someone, like how to introduce myself or like with greetings and everything. So I remember even as far back as even like middle school, I was actually when I was in middle school up in New Jersey, I was in a social skills program that my speech language pathologist created. And we did a lot of BST. It was a lot of where we would do, like, if a lot of the topics are related to what we're talking about tonight when it comes to like navigating like situations, like with greetings, like saying hello to a peer or like to an adult, or how to initiate a conversation, or even such as like with like turn taking and waiting and all that. So, for me, just like with Haley, like before having to talk to like a friend or someone, I had to also think about it because things for me did not come naturally, like at all. Like I have to like pre-plan ahead of time so I know what I'm going to talk about, and also not to, because I know when I was younger, I would engage in a lot of conversations that were more of my own topic rather than what the person wants to talk about. So it's like I just had to learn that, okay, let me learn to pause myself. Like I talk a little bit, but pause myself and then give the other person a
Yeah.
chance, because that's the only way that, like, all right, that's how I know I'll have a good conversation going.
Yeah. At the
What
same
you want to say?
time, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So at the same time, it is hard to like, yeah, you can practice it, like, and like you can practice it with
Mm-hmm.
yourself beforehand, but like majority of the time, like when I do that, like it doesn't go the way I planned. And I'm just like,
That too.
so like that's another, like if you're like working with a kid on like how to, like if they're like if you can't be with them like whenever they're introducing themselves to new people, but like if you want to prepare them for like, okay, here's some situations that like could happen, but what happens if that's not what happens? What do you do then? So like kind of preparing for the worst, basically, but like not the worst, but like preparing for something that you hadn't anticipated or planned for, because yeah, it comes out of nowhere. But at least it makes, like, if you think about, okay, here's what I would expect to be the responses. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
but if something came up that wasn't the response, I could still be prepared for it because I would know how to like circle back and redirect the conversation. And what I do, speaking of redirecting conversation, when I'm actually talking with somebody, I make sure to like, I kind of, as an adult, I do this all the time. Um, because even now, like I still kind of struggle a little bit and I still like need feedback from people. My main thing is give me feedback. So like my family does it for me all the time. All the time. Sometimes to the point like where I'm just like, okay, I get it. But it's helpful. So like sometimes I'll be like, hey, if I'm doing this and you aren't appreciating that, please just cut in and just let me know. Like if I'm steering the topic one way, so like kind of just like let me know. Um, but like yeah, so I do it with my friends now. So I'm like, okay, so I did it like in high school. Like I was like, hey, if I'm doing this, I don't want to be doing that, so please like correct me. Or like if this is like not what should be, like not what should be happening, or if this isn't relevant, or if I'm being rude, please just let me know because I don't want to be rude, and I want you to let me know so I know how not to be rude. If that makes any sense. But I do that all the time now. Like I do it with my supervisors. I do it with I do it with my clients too. Because I'm like, I'll be reading with my client and I'll be like, hey, I have something I need to say, but if I just cut you off, I'm so sorry. Like, just let me know if you need if you need me to say something different, if you need me to go back to something, because like it helps me and it helps the person listening to me because they know that I do want to have a good conversation with them. and I'm trying to accommodate for both of us.
Exactly. And I was gonna say that too, that feedback, like for me, and I actually did talk about this on I was on a panel back on Tuesday in which I was talking to graduate students in the ABA program for a university. I got to talk about like this, where it was pretty much where I was saying about how important it is, like as someone like myself who's curious about like wanting to learn a skill like this, that, that kind of feedback is just so important, because that's how we all learn. Like we learn from feedback, and even that's the same thing as like from being a provider too, like RBTs, behavior analysts, like we all learn from feedback. That's how we learn to grow and everything.
Communication is key.
Yes.
So do you want to go to the questions before we switch topics? So Emily said, Emily first said, when you rehearsed the conversations and they didn't go as practiced, did you find it more difficult to continue the conversation, or were you able to keep the flow of conversation going?
Oh, that's a great question. So in my experiences about that,
Aaron's here.
It depends on the situation. It really depended. It depended on like if I knew the topic of the conversation well, then I could keep it going. If I didn't, then that's where I'm like, okay, let me stop and think for a second. Like I'll tell someone, I'm like, give me 1 second.
Yeah, exactly. No, I did that earlier today. I was like, okay, so we're talking about this, and then I'm talking about this, and I'm like, oh wait, give me 1 second. I call it I call it loading. Buffering.
Me too.
Because I'm just like, give me a second. I need to think about how to deal with this, and then just continue on, and just if it seems like confusing to them, just kind of explain what happened, but like just try my best and be like, hey, maybe I could talk about this later. Like when I'm telling stories, I have a bad habit of like somebody like once we're having a conversation and then somebody's still talking and I have something that comes up. And I'm like, okay, wait, I can't say it while they're talking. So I just wait, and then they start moving on to a different topic. And then kind of like when they kind of like have a pause, and like when they're like you know how people pause when they talk, I'm just like, okay, really quick, if before you continue, I wanted to say like, are we switching topics, or can I say this story before we move on? So kind of just like, again, like giving like feedback and just like saying like, hey, I have this to talk about before we move on, or can we talk about this later?
Right. And that's where the whole communication comes in.
Yeah. It's like, it's not like you're not letting it, it's like I'm speaking like in terms of like if like you're having if topics are changing, not like if like I can't think of the word for it, but like in those situations it's like so everybody gets what they want to say out. And so like I'm actually working with one of my kids on it right now. Like they'll be like, hey, when I'm done with this, can I talk to you about this? And I'm like, oh yeah, sure. So like I do know like, hey, this is what we're talking about right now. And I know I'm glad that you understand that this is not socially appropriate at the moment. So I will let you say this once we have that time and once we finish what we're actually talking about right now. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it seems like it. I think to me that it seems like it does, and also like I see more comments coming in on the chat. Dr. Sarah said that she loved it where we were saying the word loading, which is true, because if we think about that, we all need time for our brains to just like process what's happening even in the conversation too. So, and a great way for us to communicate it, as we've been talking about, like our own kind of a way, our own little script a bit, that like if we're getting ready to change the topic, or like just to like clarify that, what's happening in the conversation. So I think that it's, Dr. Pilates, recharging too. Loading and recharging. Best way to hear that. And Aaron's on as well, by the way, just so we all know. Hello. Hey, Aaron.
I call it buffering.
Buffering too.
or I call it dial-up modem as well. If you remember back when telephone and internet would like coincide with one another. So when someone's on telephone, there's like a loading screen and makes that awful noise. That sometimes goes on in my brain when I'm trying to focus or remember what we're talking about, for sure.
Yeah, I think about like that too. Oh, Dr. Sarah says memories of the line screaming.
To keep on this topic really quick, because I know there was another thing that Dr. Mulholland asked about, but when somebody mentioned like loading and recharging, it reminded me of some people have these, it's also kind of like an aid for people. Like some people have this pin. It's called like it looks like a battery. It's like my social battery. And so like as like the conversation goes, you can be just like,
oh yeah.
and so like that kind of lets other people know. So like usually when I go like with my friends and something, like my friends who really like understand like, oh, I my social battery, like what that is. Usually like when we go into things or like we're starting a new conversation, I'm like, hey, my battery's like here right now. So like that's also another thing. Because we're talking about navigating social situations, you're letting other people know, hey, here's what I'm at right now, and here's how much I can probably take. And I might need to recharge soon, so yeah. That just reminded me of that.
Oh yeah. Speaking about with the whole recharging thing, that's another thing too when it comes to like I've had to tell my friends sometimes, like if we're at an event or something, that I would have to tell my friends that listen, it's getting like loud or overwhelming in this environment. I need to go somewhere quiet for a few minutes. So that way, like I've had to do that because I'm like, there just comes to a point where like, okay, I need to take a break from this area for a little bit and then I'll come back.
Exactly. Like, cause I call it. Go ahead, Erin. Sorry.
Oh, like going to the bathroom or somewhere a little bit less busy for sure. I used to, when I used to mask really hard, I would be like, oh, I really need to go to the bathroom. Or I would use like another excuse to leave the area for a while. And my friend one time pulled me aside and was like, is everything okay? Like, do you have like a bladder issue? And I'm like, no.
I feel like in that situation, like you're not always going to have like friends who like you're going to be like at a work thing or you're going to be just out in public and so somebody might not always understand it. But I think having like doing your best to have somebody who does understand is beneficial. And like I said, that's what those aids are for. So like if you don't have somebody with you, that's what like somebody who doesn't know you or who doesn't know like how you're feeling, they can see as long as you're comfortable with it. Like that's why people have like those pins and like the lanyards and like so like that your story reminded me of so my best friend and I know sign language a little bit. A lot of people I know don't, but my friends like know enough. Like they know how to finger spell. So like we were at a wedding once and I was like, hey, like we were having a good time and we were talking and then all of a sudden just like things happened and I like looked over to her and I was like, hey, I'm getting tired. And I call it my nonverbal mode because the more I go like the more I talk, the thing that I have is like the more I talk and socialize, like the closer like I get to like just shutting down a little bit, and then I just needed that quiet time, and then I'll be good again. So like I'll still be in that situation, so like I'll have to find other ways to communicate with people like with what I need. So like with my friends, like I'll be like, hey, like I'm going nonverbal right now. And so like they'll either communicate for me or they'll like read or like if I'm not with somebody who can't communicate with me, I use my phone, I like sign, I write things out. And then once I'm like and then I'll let people know like, hey, I'm getting closer to being able to like engage in a conversation again, but for now I'll be good for just listening. But again, that's not always like an option. But again, that's why like I really like those like aids and stuff because it's letting because again, you can't always avoid social situations, but you can let other people know how you're feeling and how you'll be able to contribute. So
Navigate in a sense. Yeah, I sometimes use my notes app or something on my phone too, in case as well, or text.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Did we ever? I don't think we ever got.
That's what I wanted to get to next. Actually, was with Dr. Sarah's question here. So she said that I would love to hear any tips on helping teach with interactions without becoming more of a script for a child. So like keeping a conversation going past like the initial 2 to 3 exchanges.
If I can clarify that a little bit. So an example is like when I'm trying to work with my daughter on this. And so now if you say like, hi, she'll say, hi, how are you? And you can say, fine, how are you? And she's like, good. And then she's gone. So like being able to help stay engaged, like she does her little script and then that's it. And I've seen that with clients too. So like being able to keep engaged beyond those lines that she's rehearsed. Does that make sense?
Well, I feel like it's not that they're not engaged. It's just they don't think you're talking anymore to them because it just sounds like the end of a conversation. Like I have those issues a lot, like where I'm talking to somebody, and also kind of the opposite. Like if somebody's like I'm talking with somebody and like we end up on a question and like I answer and I don't have anything to ask you, or like there's no real like no real clear direction of where it's going. I'm just going to assume this was like the pleasantries that people do that are for social just like communication, and that's basically it. Like that we did it. Okay, we're done. Unless somebody else like continues to ask me questions, and then I'm like, oh, they want to talk to me more. So like sometimes it isn't really clear. So in my opinion, like I think it's sometimes there isn't a script, but other times like it's like reading. Is it clear that there's like more to be said, or is there, or like are you leaving like an open opportunity for more discussion and conversation? Because you like conversations build off of each other, and just asking questions like, hey, how are you? Oh, I'm good. And some people just leave it at that. So does that make sense?
It does. And I think, a lot of the kids we work with, as well as my own, probably do have trouble acknowledging that. But I've also seen when it's clear, like the other person, like, so an example, she calls grandma on the phone. And, she says, how are you? And grandma says, I'm good. How are you? And she says, I'm good. And then grandma goes to say something and she hangs up. So maybe it is more of a picking up the social cues rather than staying involved in the conversation.
Yeah.
So maybe anything that would help us be able to teach them, hey, this person still wants to keep talking to you.
Usually what I tend to do is, like I was saying, like I have this issue. I wait to see like if somebody's going to pause, or like if there is that little lapse in like, because when people talk, they like pause. And I have the issue of recognizing, are they done talking, or is it my turn to talk, or are we just done talking? And I have a bad habit of doing that. And like I said, like my family gives me feedback on this all the time. So like they'll be saying a thing and they'll be like taking like a pause, like breathe, and I'll kind of wait. And I'll be like, okay, are they still talking, or like is there something else you want to say? And just kind of teaching that like not, would it be latency? I don't know if it's latency because like of the SD of somebody talking and then pausing and then starting again.
So like teaching to allow for some latency, basically.
Yes.
Yeah, latency. It is latency. Yeah.
And I think that would be beneficial because, go ahead, Erin.
I also think if you use visual cue cards, or like say, okay, 3, count 3, 2, or like count to like down a number and see if they will respond or say something to you next.
Yeah.
And if they don't, then you can dismiss the conversation.
Because like you sometimes it's beneficial to it's beneficial, like as much as it like sucks to say, and like tolerate those awkward silences a little bit. Nobody likes awkward silences.
No, especially us.
Say, Michelle?
I was actually going to say, and I had this work with one client, but this was from a client that I had in the past that graduated. With this client, I remember when I was working on conversations with them, in the beginning, it was like pretty much what we were at right now. We were like just saying, hi, how are you? They would say like, good, or whatever, like short, and that was it. Over time, like what I started to do was I was trying to pick up on like starting off maybe with their interests first, just to see if they would engage it a little bit more in the conversation. So as soon as that was happening and asking like open-ended questions, like in a way that were clear enough, that's where I started to get a little bit more of a conversation out of the client, because of the fact that like, oh, like this client, I'll give an example. This client used to love Tom and Jerry. Like he would watch Tom and Jerry like on the tablet. Like that was one of his favorite shows to watch. So I'm like, okay, well, so I would like one of the topics we would talk about is like favorite TV shows. Okay. So we go through the motions of like pretty much of like in the beginning, like greetings and everything, say how are you and stuff, and then we would go into it like just like okay, now we're gonna get to know each other. What's your favorite TV show? And then my client would tell me Tom and Jerry as an example. So that's where the conversations would keep going from there. So I kind of would take like whatever they're interested in as well. If you're trying to especially push for that engagement of a conversation, especially as we've talked about in the past before too, we've talked about with special interests and how that helps also with, especially when learning a skill like this, because I know it takes a while for even like, I know myself, it took me a long time to be able to just engage in a conversation myself. So that's another way too, is also tying in like the interests that's going on around.
I do want to add on to that, because that is, I love that. Yeah. It also is important to consider, what if this isn't a new person? What if you're just a same person on a different day? Like if if I'm talking to my mom one day, we were originally talking about like unscripted things, but generally I kind of, in my mind, I have like a sort of template of like, okay, if that awkward like silence does happen and I want a conversation to happen, okay, so if you're catching up with somebody and you haven't seen them in a while, instead of like asking, hey, what's your things, what's your favorite interest, because you already know that, maybe ask for like updates. And then and if there's any like, I love one of my favorite things is how conversations can take turns so quickly. Because like you can like, if it's something you already know about, ask more about it, ask different questions about it, and maybe it'll steer into a different topic, and then you can have a discussion about that topic that somehow stemmed from it. And I think it's like great because you can learn more things that way by trying to dig deeper into what you already do know. And just so like kind of going back, because I kind of skipped over this, but like my general thing, like if I am meeting somebody for the first time, I generally ask about their interests, like how's their day going, like what are their plans for the rest of the day, what are their plans for the rest of the week, and then whenever they answer, I'm like, oh, what is that? What do you do when you do that? Sometimes they give me an answer. I'm like, oh, I like doing that too. I also like doing this. Have you heard of this? So it kind of like it's like kind of like the branching out of the different topics. So it starts off a little bit scripted, but then it ends off not as, because it just flows naturally.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I know in the beginning it starts out a little scripted just because like you're initiating the conversation and everything. But then once you start to get into a topic, and this is where it's also important to make sure that like even for like us as providers, like making sure we're prepared about where we get down to the client's level and stuff, and like knowing their interests and everything too, because that's how it's going to drive it to where there's going to be more of a natural flow of conversation. Like, yeah, it's scripted at first, but
Yeah, I had a client who, when I was getting to know them, we played a game where it was like, okay, we're gonna turn around and we're gonna try to guess who, like we had whiteboards. It was like, what do you think the other person's favorite month of the year is? And you would write it, and then they would try to see if you were right. It's kind of like the Newlywed Game, but like for somebody you don't know, and seeing like if you're right, and like, oh, here's why I thought this was what you would like. This is why I thought, like, from what, like, it helps you get to know somebody. It helps you like learn more about them and like become more familiar with them. And I've done like a lot of, I've somehow gotten connected with clients who have the same interests as me, which hallelujah, like, because we can talk about things and we can tie those in to what we're learning, because, and especially like it helps them feel more comfortable, because I'm like, hey, have you heard about this like update on this thing? And they're like, no, I haven't. And I was like, okay, well, once you do this, I can tell you more about it. So like you kind of like using what you have, and like in those social interactions help you, especially as a provider, progress in your services, especially once you connect with them more.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I could even say that myself too, that the client I'm with right now, this client, he loves to draw just as much as I do. So I'm like, yes, I can actually like so we always like talk about with drawings and everything. Like I'll ask him what he's drawing, and he'll tell me like he'll start out with like a couple word sentences, and like over time he's actually like been building up more and more. Like now we're up to like 3 to 4 word sentences, and this has only been like a little over a month now I've been with him. So I'm like, wow.
The same thing's happening with me too.
Yeah, so just, I think that's where like, and it's also for me, I've noticed too that, and every client's different when it comes to like the approaches you take. So like my client, this one compared to the others I've worked with, this client, I actually do a little bit more, I'm actually doing a lot more naturalistic approaches, like teaching approaches, like especially a lot more play with this one than I've had with other clients, because it depends on the age and everything. But with this client, like how I try to teach him with social situations, like we pretty much are, based on like what's happening like in the moment. And that's kind of where like I'm like, okay, I could take it from here. And I'm like, I already got some ideas in my head of how we can get some conversation going. So like sometimes like I'll be talking about like what I'm playing, and then he'll start talking about what he's playing. And I'm like, it's just, yeah.
You're talking about like how like keeping to a subject or knowing if someone was done with a subject. For me, it's kind of the other way around. Because once I started talking and once I started going into conversations, it was sometimes hard for others to know when I was already into another subject because of my tone of voice. I would still, sound like I'm still talking about something that was what I was talking about earlier, but I was actually onto another subject. So I've had to make clear indications that I was going into another conversation, or I was correlating or relating the same kind of like a different subject to the same subject that I was talking about earlier.
I do all the time.
Yeah, it's running. It's like a run-on sentence, no period, nothing. So
yeah.
I had to learn to definitely make clear indication that I was talking about something else.
I have the tendency to be like, okay, I'm talking about this. Here's what we're talking about now. But now I'm going to talk about this. But now we're going to go back to this. Like, I actually do that when I'm having conversations with people. So I'm like, hey, remember this? We're talking about this now.
Oh yeah, when I'm passionate about something, I'll go on, and then I have to remember to breathe, of course,
Yeah.
but also know that they might want to add something, because then I'll notice they'll kind of like raise their head a bit, or open their mouth. So I'm like, oh wait, I gotta stop.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
Haley, Dr. Sarah said that she's also like that too. She says she can be all over the place and people can get lost trying to follow.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
yeah.
do it all the time, especially when I'm telling stories. I'm like, hey, remember we were here? Okay, now we're over here, but remember, this place is important, so we're going to go back here later, but right now we're talking about this. Like, it's just more branches. But,
Yeah.
like, unless anybody else has any, like you guys
We
mentioned
got another
already.
one that we got some comments coming in. We have here, like you guys mentioned, right, using some sort of transition word or phrase that are a great way to signal others that you're switching a topic. That always helps me out. Like when there's like some kind of visual or verbal signal that lets me know that like, okay, we're getting ready to switch to a new topic now or something. It always helps me that way.
Yeah, because sometimes yeah. Sometimes it kind of sucks when you're talking about something and then somebody, like you're like in a group with people and you want to wait for everybody to have their turn. But then like once like somebody else is talking, somebody else turns the topic and like, wait, I had something to say. And that's like somewhere like I still kind of have a little bit of difficulty. So like, so it's not like we don't want to just interrupt and be like, hey, before we move on. But like, I'll be like, hey, like I'll just kind of like, if I'm in person with them, I'm like, hey, really quick, but like not like trying to speak over them, but like, hey, really quick, can we talk about this really quick, and then we can go on. So I feel like it's a little bit tougher to do that within like bigger groups of people, but it is a good skill to practice.
Yeah.
I also do the hand raise too. Yeah, me too.
Oh yeah, I've done hand raises.
I do it all the time.
I'll give a good example on Teams. I've done that on Teams so much.
I do it
too. Like when on Teams meetings, like even like when I do for the school districts, because sometimes I'm at another school sometimes, and I'm like, if I'm in a meeting online and there's so many people talking, I'm like, I'll just press the hand raise button.
Exactly.
Like,
I've done that in these meetings before.
Just so I can say something.
I've done that in these meetings before, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But it does help give a signal to people that like, someone wants to talk here.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I definitely use a lot of visual indicators. I've learned trying to watch someone's like body movement as well to see if they'll raise their head or kind of look like they're opening their mouth a little bit or about to say something. Sometimes there's people that just don't move, and that just boggles my mind because I'm just like, are you gonna say something? Because then they all of a sudden say something like, oh, okay. I'm like, oh, that came out of nowhere.
Yeah, I've gotten that before too. Like when there's people that start to talk about something completely that's like a little off topic.
Oh yeah, left wing
and stuff. Yeah. And I've had that happen before. I will tell someone that I'll tell them like, I really love what you're talking about. We'll get back to that in like just a second.
Yeah.
Let me just finish first before we get back to your topic. But yeah, Dr. Bellotti said that another strategy that she's used a lot is having no paper out for phone conversations. It helps what to say ahead of time, as well as being able to look back at the notes guidance through the call. And pacing, yes.
It does. It does. Even in social situations, I use the note app, or like I use a note paper as well. Like if someone or somebody's already talking about something and I want to say something, they're continuing. So yeah, I've written things down. I'm like, okay, I have to write a phrase down or something, or, just kind of keep an idea of what I was wanting to talk about in my head, like part of the, like, again, like a word, but in my head. trying to keep that image in my head of what I want to talk about.
That's something I need to work on a lot more. I've been trying to work more on it, and I've actually like I'll be doing it in my job. Like if my supervisor is talking to me, and I'll be like, "Give me 1 second, let me write this down." All right, keep going. If the pace crazy enough, they will have to stop talking and ask you what's wrong, so you just talk exactly.
I also like the engage filter. I love that.
Yeah, I know that.
I'm like,
It was much needed at that job, because if I said everything that came to my head, I was going to get fired.
oh my god.
Yeah, it's important.
Yeah.
So,
definitely learning to filter words out was, yeah, that's a whole other thing.
So on that note, I kind of want to switch gears a little bit. If everybody else is like fine, like done with this topic. So I think it would, like, because we're talking about navigating social situations, I think because so far we've been talking about the good and positive social situations and like meeting somebody and getting to know somebody. But I feel like it would also be important to address like the negative situations, like maybe somebody's like bullying you or bullying somebody else. Like, how do you deal with that? Because like it's just
a big topic.
It's just as important because those are still social situations. And it could be a whole other topic for another forum, but I feel like it still ties in because not all social situations are positive.
No.
Because you have to deal with negativity coming your way, especially if you are neurodivergent and people know that, or like they don't know it and they still like, they just act the way that they will. I think personally, I feel like we should discuss that a little bit. And what I'll say right now is that like the first thing that comes to mind is when I am when recognizing the situation.
Thank you, Dr. Sarah. I couldn't agree more.
Like that's really tough. Like social cues are tough. And I feel like in my case, like there's not really a clear way to teach it. You have to experience it first.
I kind of am the same way about that. Like, I'll give an example that I went through one situation. It was back in high school, and it was like my freshman year of high school. And I had a friend who I've known since like middle school, and I didn't pick up the social cues that they were going to start spreading rumors about me. And that's what happened. They spread rumors about me. The only reason I found out about it was because of another classmate told me about it. And so that's how I found out. But I didn't know what the social cues were when that was coming, you know?
Exactly.
So, you know, like, and there's going to be moments like that people could run into a situation like that where someone will be your friend at one moment. And then the next would be like where they will start to say things behind your back.
I've dealt with that too.
Kind of social cues, you know?
Yeah, I've dealt with that too. When I was in high school, I had a whole group of friends and I thought everything was going great. And because like I would ask them for this feedback and everything, like they were like, "Oh yeah, everything's fine." Sometimes like there's like a separate group chat made, and then like we have the separate group chats, and the like I'm not trying to like dump all my issues right here, but I'm trying to like tie it into this because like sometimes like asking for that feedback wasn't enough because like you also got to especially with people you're around so much and they can like change like their minds like really quick. And like I said, it is hard to plan for, especially if you haven't experienced it. So like being in that situation, like when that happened, like I was like, where did this come from? Like what happened? And so eventually I had them like, I eventually like talked to them like, hey, what was the issue? Can you like tell me? Like, what can I do better next time? Like what did I miss? Like what was I missing? And sometimes people will be like, oh, you know what you did. No, I didn't. Like here and just like you like some people don't understand that you don't really know what you're doing, and that's why communication is key, people.
Yeah.
But but having learned from that experience, now like my relationships now, I'm like, okay, maybe I need to talk with them a little bit more before it gets to a place like where it got last time. So because like I was saying, like you have to, so as much as it sucks, sometimes you have to experience those things before you can learn how to address it in real time. Other things you can like practice, but people are difficult creatures. People are confusing creatures, neurodivergent or not. So like, it really just depends.
I completely get you on that. Erin said that she remembered the time that she had a friend she was close to, but when she and her got invited and went to the same birthday party together for a classmate, that person would make fun of her with that classmate, and she was like alienated by the group because she was swimming, playing with the younger brother, doing her own thing. Yeah. So I completely get that, and I know like just picking up the cues for that was I didn't even know until after I experienced it. So sometimes you can't always plan it out, but the fact that like learning over time, like that you get that in a way, you kind of do get that practice as you actually like experience it.
Yeah.
You know? And another comment from Dr. Sarah, she said, I think that is difficult for all kids, especially starting in middle school, even more complicated for those who are neurodivergent. But yeah, middle school, high school, there's a lot more social situations that happened.
Actually, like when I went to college, this was like the aftermath. So like that whole thing happened like at the end of high school. And so in having that experience, I went into college with the notion that, okay, maybe things aren't like as clear like as people may set up. And so once I became closer to my friends that I have now, I'm like, hey, here's what here's what like, and of course like it's, you don't want to be like too like open with somebody you barely know. But like once you do get to know somebody, like, hey, like let them know like here's what's happened to me in the past and here's what I want to do to avoid this for next time. Like if this is happening, tell, like this is circling back all the way back to the feedback, like, hey, let me know. I will not know otherwise. We need to like keep this constant communication up so that we can like learn from each other and like build off each other. And so like now, like even now, like one of my closest friends in college, we still like talk and we're like, hey, I didn't really like how you did that. This is how it made me feel, and if it happens like, and this is what I'm expecting, and here's what makes me comfortable, and if we can't do that, I don't think like this would be a good thing to keep up. Yeah. So like it's I keep circling back to it time and time again, giving each other feedback and building off of like what you know and like letting other people know like here's what I'm struggling with, here's what you could help me with, and vice versa. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes, yeah. I think it's just important and this is why feedback is just so important, especially like when it comes to situations like if you run into issues with a friend or someone, like it's important to talk about problem solve and be like, this is what's going on, like this is how I feel about the situation, let me hear you out about how you feel about the situation, like what do you feel that I did in the situation, you know, because I've ran into that even in work, like with the school district. I could even say that because I know I've had that tons of times where I'm like, okay, you feel like that this kind of support's not helping, like let me hear you out why, like what do you think, like I want to hear your feedback about it, like what's working for you, what's not, so that way we could come up with a game plan.
Exactly.
You know? So
like my friend and I, every once in a while, like it's like clockwork. Every like like once or twice a year, like we kind of like have a deep conversation with each other. Like, hey, here's what's been going on lately. Here's how I feel about our relationship. Here's how I feel about how we've been interacting. And like, do we want to like? Do we feel like we can improve our relationship and improve ourselves so we can have a better relationship? Mm-hmm. So like, it is like I just keep going back to the same thing.
I know.
Yeah,
I get that. Oh, we do have a question here, which I think this would be a good last question to talk about. Is that, would you say it is difficult to realize when someone you're talking to is not interested in the topic you're talking about or wanting to end the conversation without being rude? And he said here, I find that a lot of people have a difficult time with that. And I try not to be rude and get stuck in a long drawn conversation.
So I have kind of two answers for that. I have two responses for that. So one, when I do get into that like little loop, I'm like, every once in a while, I'm like, hey, are you still interested? Like, do you want to talk about something else? Like, I actually ask him like, hey, are you still listening? Like, are we good? And like, sometimes I'm like, not really. Or other times I'll be like, yeah, I'm listening. Keep going. Because some people respond differently. Like, it's a lot about like, I was talking with somebody about this earlier. Some people may not be watching when you're talking to them, but they're still listening.
Yeah, picking up those cues again.
Yeah, so like, kind of like, when you're talking to somebody, checking in from time to time. I mean, like, hey, are you still with me? And if not, okay, we can move on. But yeah, and then another one is like, sometimes you can't really notice, and other times like you're just gonna go through the what you're saying, and they're just like, okay, fine, and then after the fact you'll realize it, and you'll realize after the fact most likely that that's what happened, like they weren't really interested, and that's what you can build off the next time. Okay, next time I can know maybe I shouldn't talk for this long about it, or maybe next time I should ask them, hey, are you still interested in what I'm talking about? Right.
And I've had it in my experiences. I would make sure also that I've had it where I would check in with the person to be like, okay, did you understand what I was talking about? And then I'll be specific, like, I just said this. Did you understand that? And I could tell, for me, I picked up a little bit on their tone a bit when they're talking, that the sound, like when I hear their tone of voice, that the way that they sound, that they're not interested, that's how I know that, okay, well, I will tell them that it seems like from your tone of voice that you're not interested in the conversation.
Exactly.
You want to move on to a different topic because that's how I've had it before.
No, exactly. I still struggle with tone of voice sometimes, and I'm like, hey, how you feeling? What's up? But yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
Also, thank you, Dr. Mulholland. That actually made me really happy to read.
Yeah, it's really hard to indicate if someone is interested in the conversation. And I like when people tell me that they're direct with me and they tell me, hey, I'm not feeling this, I'm not feeling connected to this conversation right now. Can we go on to something else? That's usually what I try to use, is like, I'm not really connecting right now with this. Can we try something else or talk about something similar? Try to be around in the same kind of ballpark in the conversation. That way they don't feel like they're being ignored or they're not, being disproved just because of a topic that, we're not interested in. So.
And just kind of adding to my comment about your all social skills being honestly superior at this point. Some people here know I'm also a licensed counselor. And when I've done counseling a lot of times people's issues are related to poor communication skills with the other people in their lives. And
Yeah.
I mean, if I got a quarter for every time I told someone, just ask them if this is how they're feeling. Just ask them if they're okay with that, you know, and it's so hard for people. So the fact that you all are able to do that, like, you're like light years above most of us, honestly.
Yay! I love hearing
That's
that.
so sweet. Thank
Come
you.
from being
Thank
come from
you.
being ostracized and
Right?
going through my own issues with people being rude to me. And I'm like, you know what? Let me try something that's not like that.
Yeah,
and
let's
then,
do
you know,
the
I've been
opposite.
yeah, literally it's supposed to shut us down and keep us quiet, but in reality it just made me want to communicate more and figure out, okay, what should I do that's different to make myself understood, or, you know, understand what another person's going through, you know.
Mhm.
So
And
yeah, I've
honestly,
done
if
a
you're
lot
met
of
with,
people watching in my life, and you know.
sure. And honestly, if you're met with negative responses when you are open about that, it's because people aren't used to healthy communication, and it
No.
kind of scares them.
It is. It
Communication
does.
is key.
Yeah.
Communication is always key.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's also a great way for us to wrap up for tonight too.
Yep.
So I do want to thank with everybody that was on tonight on our forum. This was definitely very informative and also a interactive one. We've had a lot of comments that were coming in and stuff, so that was fantastic. Thank you guys so much, and we hope that you all have a great weekend.
Thank you for having me. Again.
Thank you.
All right, you too. Take
Have a great weekend,
care.
everybody.
The sign-out code for this presentation is 5157.